interviewing Richard Beard, a United States Marine during the Second World War, and we're going to be talking about his experiences and his life.
Well, my name is Richard Beard. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, Steelton, a Bethlehem Steel Company town. And from an early age, I wanted to be a Marine. I don't know why, I don't know where I got the idea, but before I was in high school, I was planning to be a Marine, even though I didn't know what a Marine was. And it just so happens that at the time I graduated from high school, the Second World War had started. So I went up and I signed up for the Marine Corps in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The Marine Corps picked me up, sent me to Philadelphia, where I was sworn in. We got on a train. We left for Paris Island boot camp. I'm in the Marine Corps now. This drill sergeant was standing there, and his language was something to believe. Boot camp was not easy, but on the other hand, it wasn't as hard as some people would have you believe. And we shipped out to the various assignments. I was sent to Cherry Point, North Carolina Airfield, Air Station. And I didn't know for weeks, 2 weeks, I sat there waiting to be told what I was going to do. I didn't want in the Air Force Air Wing to begin with, and they told me I would be in the Air Wing. I said, all right, I went out of the Air Force. You went out of the Air Wing? I said, yeah. And I was sent back to the Paris Island to telephone school. I was in communications, whether I liked it or not. And they sent me to field telephone school, where we learned how to handle telephones and string them and so forth. We also learned telegraphy. We also learned, semaphore. Then I was sent to Quantico, was in the telephone section of the officers' candidate school, with the job to teach officers about the field telephone until they wrapped us up, put us on a train, and sent us to California. We actually formed into units and started to train for real. Eventually getting around, I was assigned to the 14th Marines Artillery Regiment of that division. Now this was all in 1942. I went in 42, I went out to Grove City in 42, and I went back to telephone school in 42. But by the time I was in the 4th Division, it was 1943. In January of 44, we attacked a small island in the Kwajalein Atoll. We attacked the island of Ngibie, or Enyabir. I'm never certain. They never told us the name. It was only something like a half-mile long, and it had something like 500 Japanese soldiers on it. We attacked that, wiped that out. We refitted, got new equipment and so on, and then we went into the Marianas, and we attacked an island called Saipan, and that took us a while. That was a pretty rough fight. When we reached the northern end of the island of Saipan. That's where they had a big village, and the northeastern side of that island was sheer cliffs down to the ocean. And somebody said, "My God, look at that." And over here on top of the cliffs, we could see women with children in their arms jumping off this cliff. I forget how many. We set up broadcasting equipment and hollered to them that they didn't have to commit suicide. We weren't going to hurt them. We would feed them and give them clothing and take care of them till the end of the war. They didn't believe us. They were so afraid of us. The soldiers had taught them to be afraid that they committed suicide. That was an ugly thing to see. And after that, after we stopped fighting, they stopped that. But there were hundreds of them killed themselves, and they threw their babies off, and the little children who were big enough jumped off the cliff. That was perhaps one of the saddest things I saw during the war. And there was nothing we could do. From Saipan, we jumped across a narrow strip of ocean and attacked Tinian. And that was another rough fight, but we managed that, and they surrendered eventually. And before we were even done fighting, the army came in and started to build. There were obviously airplane strips. We went back to Hawaii and found out later that Tinian was where the B-29s took off to bomb Japan. And then we left. From there we went and we attacked Iwo Jima, which was something else again. Iwo Jima was perhaps the most vicious battle in the Second World War, and I'm including Europe. But Iwo Jima, they fought entirely differently. They stayed in caves, and they stayed in holes, and they stayed under cover and banged us from there. We had to find them, dig them out, and that's the way it went for a month. And finally they surrendered with some 500 still armed and roaming the island on their own. The army was very upset about it. They say we left too soon. Well, we left too soon because we were being decimated. 20,000 men in a division. We had 2 divisions. We lost 40,000 men. 40,000 casualties. My close calls came on Saipan. The first night on Saipan, we put a switchboard tent up against an embankment, and I dug a hole right next to it and sat in it. And I hollered, I swore up and down, I saw a man walking on the road. And I kept watching and watching. I had a pistol, and first thing, whoop, this guy jumps on me out of the bush. I didn't see him coming, and he banged away at me with something that turned out later to be a bayonet scabbard. He didn't have any weapon except that. I got him under me, and I pulled my pistol and bang, that was it. We never did find out what he was. I've always felt he was a civilian, but we buried him right there in the hole I was in. That's the closest call I had. On Saipan, I was in the 14th Marines Regimental Headquarters, so I worked a lot for the brass, so to speak. I was a member of a wire team composed of 4 people, a sergeant and 3 wiremen. My wire team was sent out to lay some telephone wire. The first thing I learned was the first sergeant walked over and said, "Come here," took me aside and told me that my wire team had been wiped out. So that was a fortunate occurrence for me, but not for my buddies. On Iwo Jima, when we had wrapped up to leave and were standing on the beach by our position, I walked over to a blockhouse and I listened. And my God, they were talking Japanese right in the middle of our position. So I went up to the old man and I told him, I said, there are Japanese troops in that blockhouse. So what do we do? So they went across the hump and came back with a bunch of a unit of infantry, and they turned a flamethrower on it. 7 of them. Every one of them was burned badly. We shot them down. There was nothing else to do. I guess those are the only personal adventures I had. And we came back from Iwo Jima and we stopped again on the way back at Iwo, and the B-29s were taking off and landing. One of them landed, by the way, while we were there in combat. This big airplane flew in on that little Japanese airstrip, and I'll never forget. This is a big combat airplane that's just been to Japan. It comes down and it lands on its belly. And when it hit this revetment, all the glass flew out of the front, and donuts you wouldn't believe flew out of the cockpit. That's about all I can think of.
I think that time when he was in the Marines and in the Second World War was, while obviously a very dangerous time, I think it was also probably the best time of his life. I think that he looked back on that as just the high point.